Thanks for attending our presentation. I'm Ed Joris from CDW, and my colleague is Kevin Jones. You'll be hearing Kevin Jones later on in the broadcast. And this is what we're going to be talking about. Basically, who is today's typical Mac user, and what does that Mac user look like? Then we're going to talk about the new productivity user that you're likely to encounter. We're going to talk a little bit about how they are different. And we're going to talk about why the change is coming and why you need to be prepared for it and how to prepare for it. So let's move along. Today's Mac users are typically what I would call specialists. And what we're talking about is programmers, creatives, video editors, things like that have always been the backbone of Mac adoption in corporate environments. Sometimes they call them Mac Islands. Their main focus is on their talent, and they tend to be self-supporting. That means that if they have a problem, they tend to have somebody who troubleshoots the problem themselves within their department, because it's usually not anything specific to the to the infrastructure or the computer they're using. It tends to be part of video editing or part of using Adobe Creative Cloud. And also, they tend to generally have a disdain for IT procedures. And I can say that because I used to be a creative. I used to live in one of these Mac Islands, and I used to be an art director. Now, tomorrow's Mac users are more likely to be in an environment like this. They're going to be what you would call your standard issue computer users. More like today's PC users. They would heavily use productivity apps like Office or Word or other sorts of things, Outlook, and they're going to generate more help desk calls, and they're going to have more general needs. The other thing is that they are going to, instead of disdaining IT procedures, they're going to actually rely on them, and they're going to actually use IT more than today's Mac Island users. Now, why is this happening? There's sort of a perfect storm going on here, where, first of all, Apple Silicon, if you've used an Apple Silicon computer, and I'm sure most of you have at least tested them, there is a performance breakthrough that's going on, especially when you're looking at price performance. Things like the least expensive MacBook Air are as fast or faster than the most expensive laptops that had Intel chips. The other thing that's happening is we're getting a suddenly remote workforce where people who moved away may never come back and may continue to always work from home. There's a tight job market. Now, what does that mean? That means that businesses are challenged not only to recruit staff, but keep staff. So they're going to do things like using Mac Employee Choice as a recruiting tool and as a retention tool. Another thing that's happening, and this is sort of a repeat of history, is we're seeing more and more executives bringing Apple devices to work, and they want equality with their PC, and they don't care how this affects IT. Another thing is the chip shortage. If you talk to people at CDW, you know that PCs are tough to get right now. Even Macs with Intel chips are tough to get right now. And if you contrast that with Macs with M1 chips, you'll notice that they're not hard to find at all. The other thing finally is Apple needs to grow. There's only so many of those specialist islands out there, and they need to find other places in the corporation to serve. Now, why should you care? One of the things that we need to look at is, will your systems and protocols scale from hundreds of users to thousands of users? So are your protocols robust and idiot-proof? And how well do your Macs integrate with the rest of the corporation? How well do they integrate with identity and security? And how strong is your integration with Office, and not just Office, but things like Teams and things like OneDrive? Finally, how much do you rely on Citrix for things that don't mesh? Okay. And what I'm going to say, and this is nothing against Citrix, but the more you rely on Citrix for things, the less happy your Mac users will be. So finally, think about your executive users. Okay. What if somebody were to come in and replace every company PC that every member of your executive committee is using with a Mac? Could your systems and protocols for supporting Mac stand the strain? Would you be able to sleep at night by just handing Macs to this group of people and having them be able to use them in their everyday business environment? Okay, the reason that I'm asking these questions is most PC standards and practices are relatively bulletproof. And the reason for that is simple. They've been developed over the last 25 to 30 years of giving people PCs. Mac standards and practices, because they usually only apply to a minority of the population, are often what I would call good enough. They're not bulletproof. They're not the kinds of things that you would take into the majority of the users in a corporation. Okay, how can you make the change? How can you take your procedures from being good enough to being robust and idiot proof? I'll give you a real world example. Okay, we have a company has 5,000 employees, 250 Macs. These are all in marketing, they're in video, they're in programming, they're in development. You know where they are. Okay, they're in the standard places where if you look under enough rocks in most major corporations, you find Macs. Now, this company is implementing Mac employee choice over 3 years. Okay, now, what's going to happen? How fast is that Mac population going? Everything's working fine with 250 Macs, but how is it going to work as that population grows? So let's assume that every year where PCs are reaching end of life, 31% of those PC users will switch. Now, that's not a number I picked out of the air. That's what we actually see. So, for example, in this company, we're going to see the Mac population triple from 250 users to 750. And then in year two, we're going to see that Mac population grow to 1,250. And in year three, we're going to see the Mac population top out at about 1,750. Now, there are some corporations where we've seen that Mac employee choice, Mac adoption be as much as 50%. So these numbers get commensurately bigger, up to 2,500, 2,700, 3,000 employees out of 5,000. And the question is, can your systems and your procedures stand the strain? Okay, because now we're going to be looking at a whole different level of need. So what are we talking about here? We're talking about being able to specify and detail all of your deployment processes. If you deal with Macs every day and there are people on the IT team who deal with PCs, compare the documentation that a new Mac user gets compared to the documentation that a new PC user gets. Now, where are we missing things, right? Because that documentation is going to be critical because that's where you get repeatability. If you're going to be giving out hundreds of Macs every 6 months, you have to have a repeatable process for that. Things like a new hire process or even a separation process. Odds are that because you don't have as many new hires as your PC counterparts do, you may not have documented and specified that procedure. The same thing with the separation process. How about end of life cycle replacement? There are things that you can do with an old PC that it's really not practical to do with a Mac. By the same token, there are things that you could do with, old Macs are worth more than old PCs. So the way you dispose of them may not really be cost effective in the case of a Mac. How well do Macs fit in with the established PC IT protocol? This is key because basically you want to have a world in which somebody hands you a PC, you can give them a Mac, they can use the same password, everything works just like you expect it, all the data is just where you expect it to be, and you have access to the things you expect to have access to, and you are excluded from the things that you aren't. Things like integration with um, integration with PC uh, uh, privileges is critical. So with that, we're going to talk about how you can professionalize your environment, and I'm going to skip over to hand it off to Kevin Jones, my colleague from CDW.
Thanks, Ed. Thanks for that great introduction. As we talk about what is needed, let's look at what Jamf is offering. Jamf is laser focused on making our customers' deployments successful and as painless as possible. With Jamf Pro and data policy, it helps you manage your devices. Jamf Connect, along with private access, helps with the initial setup and maintenance of endpoints and their identities. Jamf Protect, along with Threat Defense, will protect your devices, end users, and information from accidental leaks and purposeful intrusions. All right, and this just kind of shows you a diagram of how Mac is managed by Jamf. As you can see, user registers Mac with Intune. I'm sorry, this is where the Mac is managed by Jamf. The Mac is then registered with Intune. Jamf sends Mac OS device inventory to Intune. Intune evaluates compliance, then generates a compliance report. Azure AD enforces conditional access, then allows access from compliant devices, then block access from non-compliant devices, which really provides a user-friendly remediation experience. And so now we're going to talk about our Jamf and Apple services. This week at JNUC, we're rolling out the first of our suite of CDW professional services for Jamf and Apple deployments. That suite includes Apple Security Integration, Apple Identity Integration, Jamf Pro Pilot, Microsoft Endpoint Manager Integration, and Apple Acceleration Service. That concludes our presentation. We thank you all for listening. Thanks again, Ed, for that great introduction, and we look forward to working with you all.